Alright, let's dive into the winter of 1778, a time when the Revolutionary War had hit some serious twists and turns. And one epic moment was about to change everything. Imagine the scene. The Continental Army was just out of Valley Forge, bruised and beaten, but holding on. Then, in steps one of the unlikeliest allies, France. That's right, France. Let's back up a little to understand how this came to be and why the Franco-American Alliance signed on February 6, 1778, wasn't just a diplomatic handshake but a lifeline for a nation on the brink. Winter had locked the American troops in Valley Forge, Pennsylvania. Imagine freezing temperatures, starvation-level rations, and soldiers with barely any shoes to wear in the snow. George Washington's army was in survival mode, and the British forces seemed to be on the cusp of quashing the revolution once and for all. The Americans needed resources: food, ammo, uniforms, training, everything a half-baked revolutionary army lacked. But most importantly, they needed support on the global stage. Up until now, the revolution was basically David versus Goliath, with America swinging a slingshot of farmers and a few muskets against the most well-funded military in the world. Enter France, the ultimate wildcard. Though they had long held a rivalry with Britain, France wasn't exactly eager to jump into another conflict just yet. Years earlier, the French had faced serious losses during the 7 Years' War, and weren't about to risk everything without good reason. But when news of the Americans' improbable win at Saratoga reached Europe, French leaders took a step back and thought, wait, maybe these revolutionaries actually have a shot. Let's talk about Saratoga for a second. This was the battle where General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold, before he turned traitor, pulled off a major upset. They defeated British General John Burgoyne in upstate New York, proving that maybe, just maybe, the Continental Army wasn't just a ragtag group of rebels destined for a quick defeat. Word spread like wildfire across Europe, reaching King Louis XVI and his ministers, who saw the Americans' potential as something much bigger, a chance to weaken their old enemy, Britain. So, in a move that would make any chess master proud, the French government sent over agents including the famous playwright-turned-diplomat Pierre Beaumarchais to feel out the Americans. They started small, with covert shipments of weapons and supplies to the colonies. But by 1777, the idea of an official alliance began to grow more real. Now let's talk about Benjamin Franklin, the man, the myth, the legend. Franklin wasn't just known for his wit and inventions, he was also a diplomat who knew how to play the game. And France loved him. Picture him in his simple American clothes, a stark contrast to the French nobles dripping with lace and jewels. Franklin's down-to-earth charm and political savvy made him a hit, and he milked this popularity for all it was worth. He understood that France could be the decisive ally America needed. Franklin began working on French officials, playing up Britain as a common enemy. He persuaded them that an American victory could realign global power. The French ministers, especially Charles Gravier, the Comte de Vergennes, were intrigued. France began to see that if they backed the Americans and the Americans won, Britain would be weakened, and France's standing on the world stage would skyrocket. By early 1778, Vergennes and Louis XVI were ready to make a move. They drafted two critical treaties. The first was the Treaty of Amity and Commerce, which officially recognized the United States as an independent nation, a slap in the face to Britain. The second was the Treaty of Alliance, which was basically France's way of saying, we've got your back. On February 6, 1778, in Paris, the treaties were signed. The Franco-American Alliance was now official. With this, France agreed to enter the war if Britain declared war on America and to not stop fighting until American independence was won. France would provide military aid, funds, supplies, and most importantly, a navy, something the Americans desperately lacked. When word of the alliance reached American shores, the morale boost was off the charts. Imagine soldiers who had been starving at Valley Forge hearing that the King of France was sending ships and soldiers to help them fight. Washington's army, though still ragged and exhausted, suddenly had a renewed sense of hope. The revolution was no longer just an American endeavor, it had transformed into an international struggle. Meanwhile, the British were furious. They knew a French alliance was bad news, but the depth of their anger went beyond just military concerns. This was about pride, about an empire that saw itself as invincible. Now they were up against not only a colony, but a coalition. British forces scrambled to adjust, shifting troops and resources to protect their holdings in the Caribbean, which were now at risk from French attacks. The whole balance of power shifted as Britain realized this was no longer just a rebellion, it was a global conflict. True to their word, French forces began to prepare. Ships were outfitted, soldiers trained, and supplies allocated. By 1780, French forces under the command of General Rochambeau arrived in America, ready to join the fight. The French Navy, in particular, was a game-changer. At the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, it was the French fleet that helped trap British General Cornwallis, forcing his surrender and effectively sealing the American victory. This was no small thing. The American victory at Yorktown would not have been possible without French support. And it was this alliance, formalized on that February day in 1778, that set all these events in motion. The Franco-American Alliance changed everything. It was one of the first formal alliances the United States would ever make, and it proved to be a winning strategy. For France, this alliance was costly. They poured millions of livres into the war effort and suffered their own financial strains as a result. This, in part, led to the French Revolution, as economic pressures and discontent began to simmer back home. But for the United States, this alliance was invaluable. It showed the world that a united front could challenge a superpower. The American colonies weren't just rebellious territories, they were players on the world stage, shaping the future of international diplomacy and alliances. This alliance wasn't just about strategy, it laid the foundation for a unique relationship. France was the first country to recognize American independence, a fact that Americans celebrated for decades to come. When the Statue of Liberty was gifted to the United States nearly a century later, it wasn't just a random gesture. It was a symbol of this deep-rooted friendship that had begun with the Franco-American Alliance, showing that while nations and governments might change, the ties formed during those critical years of struggle could last through generations. Looking back, the Franco-American Alliance was a gamble, a risky move for both nations. France put its resources and reputation on the line for a rebellion halfway across the world. For America, this alliance was the lifeline it needed to turn the tide of the war. And as history would show, this decision to sign that piece of paper in Paris on February 6, 1778, was a choice that changed everything, leading to an American victory, a French financial strain, and ultimately, the birth of a nation.